From Hong Kong, Chicago, and the city of Stoke-on-Trent, this is the Classic Lenses podcast. Hello and welcome to episode 118. My name is Simon Forster and I'm joined by Johnny Sisson and Perry G. And rustling away, I think that was Johnny. Hello, Johnny.
Hello.
and was that you with the sweet wrapper there, Perry? Or was that Johnny as well?
No, that's totally Johnny. I got nothing but cameras.
That was all me.
Yeah, I got nothing but cameras around me right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's good to have you back. It's a belated recording. Because normally we'd do this on in UK time on a Friday on a Monday afternoon and early doors in Chicago and late at night in Hong Kong. But we're a few days late, so we actually recorded this on a Saturday late afternoon in the UK because a few things have been going on in the world of Johnny Sisson.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably a good place to start. So instead of heading over to Hong Kong, let's go to Chicago, Johnny.
Well, it's been an epic week in Chicago. Just to get something important out of the way first, the weather is fine here today, so it's nice and sunny. I know people want to hear about that, but yeah, it's been an epic week in America. I think we could safely say, and that certainly affected us in Chicago. So. It feels much longer than 1 week has gone by. In the ongoing unfolding, I can't believe what's going to happen next year of 2020. So yeah, I probably I would guess that everybody listening to this podcast probably heard that Central Camera burned down, or didn't really burn down. The building is still standing, but the interior of the building turned into an oven, and everything inside the interior space burnt up. So conversely, the shop is now closed until they're able to reopen in some form or fashion, which will not be in the same space, at least for now. So. We'll see what happens. But for the time being, Central Camera is completely closed, and we'll reopen at some point here in the future. Hopefully, not too long from now.
I mean, I think certainly anybody that's been in many of the Facebook groups are connected with photography, and especially the analog based. Film groups and photography groups on Facebook would be familiar because it's been pretty big news out there. And I think the most notable for me thing that's come out of this is an interview with Don, the owner, and it was live on television on the news channel. I assume it's a news channel in Chicago.
Yeah, it's right.
Yeah, and he was standing outside his place, and the fire department were in there trying to douse flames and so on, and he was being recorded live on right in front of the place, and his attitude was remarkable because. I think I know what I'd be like if such a thing had happened to me, and I'll be very upset about it, to say the least. And he was incredibly calm, and his attitude was just incredible, really, because he was not. I mean, he'd arrived there, I think, about 9 o'clock in the evening, and at that point there were people going in and out of Central Camera, taking armfuls of cameras and whatever it is that they could just pick up.
Right.
And he felt that he couldn't go in there and just stop people for obvious reasons. And yet, his viewpoint was it seemed to be one of understanding of why this horrible event was going on, rather than look at my business going down the tubes. I just wonder if you want to put a little bit more flesh on that.
Yeah, there's also a radio interview that I'll put in the show notes, because I don't think that's made the rounds in the same way that the TV interview, like as it was happening, that a lot of people have seen that, but he was interviewed on the radio a couple days later, and it gives a lot more kind of calm reflection on what happened, and the history of the shop, that I think puts a lot of understanding maybe behind his attitude. I mean, I don't want to speak for him. I can only speak as someone who, worked right next to him for 4 years and has known him for much longer. But his attitude did not surprise me. It was absolutely characteristically Don Flesch, that he was calm and trying to look at the big picture, because that's the kind of person that he is. I mean, he's a genuine person. He does not he can't fake anything. It's just not him. It's not the way he works. So he spoke his genuine feelings. He genuinely is. He's genuinely more upset by injustice than anything else that happens in the world. And like many of us, he's been beside himself for the past 3+ years, living through the nightmare that is Trump's America, because we see it firsthand in Chicago. And he you got to remember, he also lived through the 68 riots in Chicago, which happened also literally in the same place, a block away. He lived through that as well. I have family members who lived through that. I have family members who were deployed as members of the National Guard in 1968 on the streets with bayonets and live ammunition. So and watched it burn also after MLK was assassinated, and huge parts of the city were never rebuilt after that. So I think if you're from Chicago and you're not an utter, right-wing reactionary asshole, you have some understanding of why Chicago, racial politics in Chicago are so difficult. And on top of that, Central Camera is one of the, you're going to have to trust me on this unless you're from Chicago. It's one of the very few types of businesses where you walk in and you see black people, brown people, white people, whatever type of people all in the same space together. That is really, really unusual in Chicago. I mean, I'm talking about a small business, not a Macy's or a Target or something. It is very unusual that people come from many different areas and neighborhoods and demographics to one place. It's very segregated. So we deal with all parts of the community in Chicago. So what a little bit better what people's lives are like, right? And the amount of injustice that exploded after the George Floyd thing nationwide, in every place where it exploded, every city has its own little dynamic of injustice that people were reacting to. And very clearly, Chicago had its own dynamic. And that's really what you saw when protests turn to riots, because that's what protests turn into when nobody listens for decades. So that's what you saw in Chicago, and it certainly, it's sad, and it I won't say it's shocking, and so it didn't shock me when I saw Central Camera burning. Here's the other thing to understand: Central Camera is one block away from the federal building where the Department of Homeland Security is housed. So the people who are running around Chicago trying to detain people who have migrated here for work, etc. So you've got the federal building right there, and then 2 blocks north from there, you've got City Hall and the county building. So you have all of local, national, and federal government within a block or two of Central Camera. And then 1 block the other way is Michigan Avenue, which is the main downtown street where all the protests always happen. So you're kind of surrounded by you're surrounded by the epicenter of where all this stuff happens. Okay, so all of that, I'm just saying that as a preface to help people understand how Central Camera was kind of just happens to be in the middle of all this, and also a little background on why Chicago was a tinderbox ready to explode. And you have to remember that just a few years ago, an equally horrifying incident happened where a 17-year-old kid who was detained by the police lying on the ground, spread eagle on the ground, was shot, 16, 17 times. And that video didn't come out for a year. And it finally came out, and Chicago, to its credit, didn't explode into riots and fires and, looting when that happened. And then nothing changes. And then, you pile some more garbage on there. So I think Don just, in his heart understands injustice, and he saw what was happening as a reaction to that. Whether people want to agree with, property being destroyed is another matter. You may not agree with it, but I think you should at least be able to recognize how it's plausible that it can happen. Just thinking about other people who maybe aren't you, and maybe you have a different situation in life than you, might be so frustrated that things eventually come out that way. That's what happens. So anyway, I think Don, being Don, has a larger perspective on the world. And what are you going to do? Like he said, what's he going to do? What's he going to do? Go over there and try to stop people from looting his business? It's not going to happen. Anyway, all that is just to say, it didn't surprise me that it happened. I don't think it surprised Don. It hurt him. It's painful to see, but what he said in that interview came from the heart, which is the real problem is what caused Central Camera to be burned in the first place. And he said that, and he meant that. So, I'm not going to speak for him, but I think you just have to understand the man, and you have to understand why he was able to sort of calmly stand there and just say, what can you do? So anyway, for people who haven't seen that video, I suggest you watch that. And I suggest you listen to the, 10-minute, 15-minute radio interview that he did, which I'll link that into the group as well. So
two things come to mind, one in terms of Don's reaction, and one to the broader point that you were making earlier, which is, number one, in addition to everything that you and Simon have noted about how he reacted, the thing that really struck me, that I think highlighted to me what kind of man he is not only, his demeanor throughout that interview, but at the end of it, he made a point of asking the reporter and the cameraman their name.
Yeah.
And that to me is such a strong indication of, a real human heart.
Yeah.
Where everyone, regardless of your job or your background or who you are, like, you're a valuable person to
right. Yeah.
work this time.
That is classic Don. Everyone who comes into the shop that he has a conversation with, he wants to know their name. He wants to know where they're from. He wants to know why they're visiting. He wants to know what it's like where they're from. I mean, this is what he does. He will get people who come in from, you name the country, wherever they walk in, right? If it's someone from Canada, he starts singing "Oh Canada." If it's someone from France, he starts singing the Marseillaise or whatever, right? I mean, that's just what he does. He's like that. And then he'll end up having an hour-long conversation with those people. They'll be like trying to leave the shop, and he follows them out of the shop, and he asks them if they've eaten yet, and he tells them where to go eat. I mean, this is what he does. It's just his nature, right? So he's a people person, and he wants to know about everybody, and he wants to help everybody if he can. He'll probably end up giving them his cell phone number in case they have any trouble while they're in Chicago. They have someone they can call. He does this all the time, right? So that to me was just typical Don is to ask everybody in the film crew and the TV crew what their name is, because he genuinely wants to know. So that's why I said, Perry, to me, that's, a really notable thing that you mentioned, because it's what you're seeing is the true character of an individual. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly how he is. So
yeah. I mean, it was amazing seeing that part in particular, and also just on the broader point, I think it is important that regardless of whether or not you agree with the violent protesting and rioting and looting,
right.
For me, obviously, it hits home pretty hard as well, seeing it all.
Right.
That you at least try to understand it, because it is very, very understandable.
Yep.
And I find it an extremely lazy response and argument when people say, I don't understand why they're doing that. Try to understand,
right.
Because there are profound reasons why A, it's completely understandable, and in many ways, in some dimensions, highly justifiable as well.
Yeah.
When a system that is supposed to treat everyone equally, that is supposed to uphold, rules and principles, fundamentally falls apart, and you've exhausted all legal and legitimate channels,
right.
People lash out.
Yeah.
And so try to understand that decades, if not centuries of pain, manifesting itself against a system that's like fundamentally not doing what it's supposed to do.
Right.
And don't go down the lazy path of saying, like, I don't understand why people would damage property in their own city in order to protest, because, I live in Hong Kong. It's very, very real here. And I think that's just a fairly lazy and cynical way to go through life, to simplify things down to violence is never okay. And I don't get why people would destroy their own stuff. Like, just put yourself in their shoes. It's very raw. It's very real.
Yeah. And it's, I don't know. It's very American too. It's really frustrating. Americans lost their shit when some football player was on his knee silently in protest during a stupid football game. Mm. Right. And they couldn't handle that. If you can't handle somebody silently protesting in a visible way like that, how do you think people are eventually going to react when nothing changes? Because nothing has changed since then, right? Nothing has changed. So it's you're right, Perry. It's really, really lazy and selfish. And I mean, I think that's been the most notable. I think selfish has been the most notable way to describe 2020 in America, where people cannot even bring themselves to do something for public health. It's people don't even understand people are so selfish. They don't even understand. They don't even think about what the two words mean together when you put them together next to each other, right? Public health. It means that everybody's health is connected at a certain level because everyone lives in a society together, right? So if people can't even wrap their heads around that and understand that some short-term sacrifices need to be made for public health, of course they can't wrap their heads around this one. So selfish America 2020, as we've seen, continues on this week. And Perry, I would just say the same as you. Whether or not you want to agree with it or feel that it's valid in any way. And the other thing is, there's protesting and looting are two different things, and it's not the same. It's really not the same people, mm-hmm. Right? I mean, there were people pulling up in panel vans in front of stores in the Loop to cart stuff off in an organized fashion. That is not people who suddenly turn from protesting to stealing things. It's two different things, mm-hmm. Right? In the vast majority of cases. Sure, is a window broken and some protesters who are now running from the cops or whatever are pissed off, do they grab something out of the store? Yeah, sure, probably. I don't know. But that's really not how it's happening. So the level of laziness and trying to understand what's happening. Yeah, Perry, to me, it's truly, it's not shocking because it's just, that's pretty much America. But it's truly mind boggling that people can't bring themselves to that slight level of understanding how something like that might happen.
I think part of that is going to be down to just people's experiences in their own lives,
sure,
whatever the issues are. And I'm just trying to put myself in this position now because I count myself as being quite clued up about what's going on in Hong Kong and why. And there's a very good reason why that is, because Perry G talks about it every week, and we can live it. And it's somebody that we know Perry, we know how he thinks about ordinary things in life. So when he says something about some extraordinary things that are happening, it's a lot more powerful because it's somebody we know talking about it in the way that we understand.
Sure.
And the similar kind of thing goes with we haven't talked about it on air, but we've certainly had conversations about the endemic racism and the way that things are set up in Chicago specifically, and also in the US generally. So perhaps somebody like myself, although I've had to calibrate my response to it to some degree, but if you live in a relatively safe society, and I mean, I'm sort of calling that the UK at the moment, but the thing is, like, even in the UK, it's okay to say, well, I don't see any racism, and it's a case of, well, I don't, but that's because of the life that I actually live in at the moment. My life is actually pretty much in my house all the time, so I don't even see what goes on in the outside world. But even if I did, the part of the world where I'm in, I don't see that kind of thing as too much of an issue, I should say. But that's not to say that it doesn't exist, because it absolutely does, and people are fighting this every day of their lives in this country and most other countries around the world. So
right.
It's, you do have. So I'm just. When you say about these people being lazy to have that kind of view, sometimes it's ignorance and I'm not trying to say bad things about these people. If you don't know something, you don't know.
Yeah, it's just I do totally understand where you're coming from, Simon. I think just in the case of Chicago, it's impossible not to understand this unless you just purely believe it does not exist. And there are a lot of people who just purely believe that racism does not exist. And the only reason things are bad in Chicago, in certain parts of Chicago, is that those people are lazy and they don't try. And that's just the way they grow up, and they're fine with that. And that's a very common view. I mean, I grew up, I grew up half an hour outside of the city itself. And that was the view among most of the people that raised me and that I grew up around. I can remember my mom getting on the phone and calling the police because there was a black man in the neighborhood. That's how it was, because somebody was going door to door doing, I don't know, selling something. So what do? You call the police and say there's a black man in the neighborhood. That is how little understanding people have about all of this stuff, even within 30 minutes of the city, right? So and a lot of them left the city when they were kids in the 50s because of white flight, because the city neighborhoods were integrating, so they left. So it's a really complex issue, but I can't give anyone in Chicago a pass for not understanding what's going on in Chicago unless they willfully don't want to understand. And that's where I kind of draw the line. I mean, I can't speak for everyone everywhere, but I can speak as someone who grew up here that there's no way you can't have some understanding of this unless you refuse to try and you have your mind made up and you simply don't believe that it's a problem.
Yeah.
And that's my problem, at least in Chicago, with people who have that attitude.
Yeah. And that, I think that's why it's all the more important to, open your mind and your ears.
Yeah.
Because, the position that violent protest and looting and rioting is disruptive and counterproductive, etc., that is the easiest position in the world to understand.
Right.
So that common courtesy of trying to understand where you're coming from is almost by default afforded to those who oppose, these violent forms of protest. But do them the same courtesy in return, because there's little that infuriates me more than the belittling of those who are the victims of injustice,
right,
as somehow being irrational, right? So give them the respect they deserve, give us the respect we deserve, and listen and think.
Yep.
Because you got to try to understand, because you can't critique unless you understand first. And maybe if you understand, you'll grow a little as a person too.
Yep. Well, I think that makes sense. And I think the other thing that's just notable about maybe Don's reaction and just his worldview is you have to understand that a very large portion of his family died in the Holocaust. His grandfather, who started the shop in 1899, when he tells this story in the radio interview, he left Hungary at 13 years old, which was the Austro-Hungarian Empire at that point in time. And this is before the First World War, and he left because as a young Jewish boy, at the age of 13, he's going to be drafted essentially into the militia of the military, which you're then obligated to serve in pretty much your entire adult life, right? So he didn't want to have to do that. His parents didn't want to have to do that. So he walks from his town in Hungary to Italy so that he can get on a boat and go to America. So he made this at 13 years old, made a 6-month journey from his home to the United States with nothing here, without knowing the language, without knowing anybody, without knowing anything, to try to find a life that was going to be better, because he was at such a disadvantage in the place he was at, right? But the family who were left there, they all died in the Second World War, with a few notable exceptions in his family. Most of the family perished in Nazi death camps. So, someone who lives that every single day of their life, and he lives it every single day of his life, just as the way other people who have experienced injustice live it every moment of every single day of their life, it affects his worldview. And therefore he has a very understanding view of the world that is shaped by justice and injustice, right? So that's who he is at his heart and soul. It's just who he is. So I think it makes a good case for what you're saying, Perry, is that if you want to make the effort to see the world and have more see the world in a way that allows you to have more perspective on it, it's possible to do that. Some people have that easier because of their history and who they are, and some people don't, but it's possible for everyone to do it. That's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, and if you've ever used the hashtag All Lives Matter in response to this, you're a dick.
Yeah,
stop doing that, because it's like busting into a meeting about women's issues in a workplace and going, men have problems too. It's like, yeah, shut up. We know.
Yeah,
go away.
Right.
Sorry. Mini rant.
Yeah. So anyway, that's I don't know. That's the background. I mean, if I know there may be some questions about going forward and fundraising and what happens next with Central Camera, and I can certainly speak to that a little bit. And again, I'm 1 degree. I'm speaking as a furloughed employee who knows the owner very well. So I don't know everything, but I can tell you what I know firsthand, having talked with the owner 3 or 4 times since the fire. Right.
Well, I think that's a good place to set off on in that direction now, and it was remarkable, and we've talked at length about Don's reaction, but what came next was pretty amazing as well. Because I think it was the next day the family put a GoFundMe campaign, but it went live. I don't know what the correct terminology is, and for saying, well, if you want to help get this place back up and running again, then you can donate some money. And and I've got to say, I was absolutely shocked at just how quickly that took off. I mean, within an hour, it was like doing about $10,000 an hour or something like that in the early part of it, which was just incredible outpouring of goodwill towards this business. And as I'm saying that, I'm there thinking, it still feels a bit difficult here because we're talking about this business has been burnt down. Well, in metaphorically, it's not there at the moment. No amount of money is going to bring George Floyd back.
Exactly.
And I think people have always got to remember that these places that have been burnt and the property that's been damaged and so on, it's property, it's things, it's not life.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Go on.
Mm-hmm.
No, and I was going to say, in our fundraising information for the shop, we make a specific point to tell people to please support as well these other organizations related to social justice. I did a blog post for the shop about the fire with the links, and there are links there to organizations people can donate to. And we absolutely encourage people, if you're going to give, $20 to Central Camera, give $20 to one of these organizations to help, fight injustice in this country, and hopefully things change and we don't keep going through this cycle. Right. So we we recognize that every step of the way. And that's really, truly the most important thing.
Go on.
So I mean, I guess as far as where the fundraiser stands, there was a goal put forward of $250,000 towards the rebuilding of Central Camera. The goal is we're $185,000 into that right now, so we're sort of well on our way to reaching that. We've had almost 4,000 people donating, and it's I'd say it's largely people who are local, but a very good portion of that are people from elsewhere across the country and really around the world, which is really, really a wonderful thing to see. And there's a lot of stories people are posting also about why they're donating and why they feel the way they do. So yeah, that's a really wonderful thing. And the other thing that we're doing is, let me just pull up the other bit here, is we're selling some T-shirts for people who want to do something to basically just show their support and maybe make spend a smaller amount of money. So you can buy a T-shirt for around $20, and about not quite half of that goes to Central Camera. I mean, the other part is to buy the shirt itself, but we get about $10 from that, and we've sold something like 400 T-shirts this week. And that's great because people want to show that they believe in Central Camera, which is really cool. And that certainly helps too. So a big thanks to everyone who's kind of done those two things. Yeah.
And just talking about the fundraiser as a whole, because I mean, I know there being questions. I mean, as much as we've talked about people having interesting viewpoints on Black Lives Matter and and what's been going on in the States at the moment, and there's almost equally interesting views on the why is there even a fundraiser at all? Doesn't the place have insurance? And so on, and perhaps you could just fill in people on that one.
Yeah, and I'll try to be charitable and nice here in my comments. Because I get it. I get it that people really don't understand the way this stuff works. So I'm just going to approach it from a standpoint of people's knowledge of things like this comes mainly from TV dramas. So let me just tell a little story that might be illuminating. We had over a year ago in January of 2019, some people may recall that Central Camera had a big basement flood because we had the polar vortex and we had minus 40-degree temperatures for several days, and so all these massive water pipes broke in the basement of Central Camera and of the basement of the adjoining building, and the basement was flooded. So everything that we had in the basement, which is where we stored a lot of the merchandise that, the overstock merchandise, right? That was all destroyed in the basement flood. Okay. And the physical space was damaged as well, right? We don't own the space. We rent it from the building. Okay. So the stock in the basement's destroyed and the basement is unusable because it was flooded. So over a year later, we've still not received a payment for any of that because the building owner and the store's insurance, the lawyers are still jerking each other off because that's what lawyers do. So we haven't been paid over a year later for all that damage. We haven't been paid for the stock. And the other thing is the merchandise. You have to understand, it's not like if you sell something for $10, you're getting reimbursed for $10 for the insurance, the insurance company. You're getting reimbursed for a portion of the wholesale cost. And you're getting reimbursed for used merchandise, which is mainly what Central makes its living on, at a fraction of the wholesale price of the used merchandise. So you never come anywhere near recouping your actual losses in terms of merchandise. That's just right off the top. And then a large portion of that money goes to rehabbing the space to make it usable again. So most of the funds that are going to be raised are going to go towards rehabbing the space to make it usable again, which is going to cost far more than $250,000. So I think if I did a back of the envelope calculation, because I can't tell you exactly how they came up with that number, other than it was a good round figure of that somewhat represented operating costs. That is not even 4 months worth of rent and salaries and expenses like utilities and it's not even 4 months worth of keeping the business running. So, and you're looking at it easily a year before any insurance money comes in that could be used towards opening the shop. So it's a short-term goal of money that can be used to help the shop reopen in some form or fashion in the meantime while all of that stuff takes place. So it's, in the grand scheme of things, when you're talking about doing business in the central business district of the third largest city in the country and an international, an international city where the rents are, $50,000, $60,000 a month in rent. That's just in rent. You're talking about a really small short-term amount of money to keep the business going or to allow the business to operate at a reduced capacity, right? Until that stuff happens. But there is no windfall profit, take a trip to Vegas because you got all this insurance money. That's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. Even if you have good insurance, it's not going to happen. So it's a difficult time, and I think it's a conservative amount of money to enable the owner to simply be able to open the business again and pay a few people and pay rent and keep the lights on. And I know that might be hard for people to understand, but you really have to understand the market that you're talking about. I mean, if this was, if we were in Iowa City or somewhere else in the U.S., that cost would, that amount of money would go a much further way towards doing a lot of things, but we're not. I mean, we're talking about, literally downtown Chicago where there are very few independent businesses left because it's unimaginably expensive to do business there. So just try to have a little perspective on what that amount of money means for a business. And I think it's a conservative and realistic amount of money to ask for people to contribute if they want to help. It's by no means a windfall for anybody to get that amount of money when the goal is to actually use it to open the business again. Yeah. So that's the nice version of, come on, people. Come on, think about it. Do the math. Anyway, I'm
just wondering what version you gave to whoever it was that asked or potentially suggested that. How does a fire start in a place like this?
Oh yeah, okay.
That sounds suspicious.
Yeah, I can. So here's another good one for you. So there's a picture in a link that Bob Matter sent that we're going to share the link. There's a picture of Don walking through the space with a headlamp on, like one of those camping headlamps, right? And the space behind him is obviously blackened and burned and destroyed. And he's got his stupid Rolly Prego point and shoot around his neck, because that's the camera he uses, which is hilarious. Of all the cameras he could carry around every day, he carries on a Rolly Prego point and shoot. It might be a Pentax now. He had a Rolly for a long time. And he's got a couple of plastic bags in his hands with stuff that he's tried to salvage. But you can see in the photo that the shop is most definitely completely destroyed. And the reason he has a headlamp on, if you look behind him, it is blackness. And the way Central Camera is laid out, it's this really long and skinny space. It's about half of a football pitch long, and it's about 20 meters wide. No, it's about 4 or 5 meters wide, the working space. So it's this very long and skinny shop with very high ceilings. So when we shut the shop down at the end of the night and turn the alarms on, if you happen to be in the back of the shop taking a pee, or you forgot your coat or whatever, you are literally cannot see your hand in front of your face, pitch black. It is pitch black when the lights go out, except for right up in the front, there's a couple of lights on, to deter theft when the place is closed and the gates are pulled down. So let's say that you're a looter. And let's say that you're one of these looters who, it's a crime of opportunity. It's a camera shop. There's cameras in there that are worth some money. So you're going to smash the window and you're going to go in and take a camera, whatever. There is no light in there. So unless you came equipped for your looting with a flashlight or a torch, which you may or may not have planned to do, you're probably the only way you're going to see anything in this pitch black shop is with a lighter or something that you whip out or your phone or whatever. But the shop is a death trap. Okay. It's a narrow space with things packed floor to ceiling. Much of it is paper. Much of it is fabric and whatever. It is so easy. It would be so easy to even accidentally start a fire in that shop, trying to see what the hell you were trying to find in there to take. And if somebody decided to, just light a fire to light the space up, there's your fire. So to me, the idea that, it was purposely torched by the owner, number one, and I haven't really heard that suggestion too much, which is completely absurd, based on what we've talked about earlier. I mean, the man's life is in this place. It would be like burning, take whatever your most prized family possessions are and put them in a pile and light them on fire. That's what it would be like. Okay. So the chance of a fire accidentally starting in the middle of looting and mayhem, to me, it is a super high probability. And I just assume that is what happened, unless somebody just wanted to torch it to hide, the evidence of whatever they were doing. I don't know. Who knows? The building owner, as I mentioned, is a total knobhead and is too stupid to burn the building down himself. This guy is like, and again, I'm going to try to be charitable. He has no background in real estate. None. Zero. He's like some doctor guy from India. He does not know anything about commercial real estate. All right. So all he knows is that he bought this building and he jacked everybody's rent up, and he jacked the rent up so high that the business that was in the space next door for 40, 45 years just literally closed their doors, has been vacant for 3 years because they couldn't afford to do business there anymore. And he's basically tried to do the same thing to Central Camera. And Don has, fought him every step of the way because they've been there since 1929. But the guy is an absolute moron. So to me, there is no way that this guy thought, oh my God, there's looting and rioting. I'll run downtown and light the building on fire. He's dumb as a bag of rocks. I mean, there's no way. So somehow, I don't know how, somebody started a fire in the shop for whatever reason, in a pitch black, dark shop where you can't see anything. It's sort of like that thing where it's like the easiest answer is usually the correct one, folks.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it comes down to. So it's super plausible to me that a fire could have gotten started in the middle of absolute mayhem of looting inside the shop. And that's why maybe Central Camera burned versus a place like, Target or Macy's, where they've got gigantic freaking lights everywhere and it's a huge open space and you can see everything even when they're closed. I mean, it's a really big difference. It's just not the same kind of store as those places. And it is the only camera store in downtown Chicago, the only one. And, cameras are always those kinds of goods that are easy to take and steal and resell. It's always been that way. I mean, that's why people have always stolen cameras. They're easy to resell. So it's really, to me, it's really, really obvious why people would break into a camera store and why this particular camera store might have burnt to the, burnt from the inside out as a result of that.
Yeah. Actually, on that note as well, just going back to getting things straight and getting stock in the place and so on. I mean, in that photograph in the article that Bob sent us, that we'll share the link, you can still see shelves with some levels of stock, not the excited stuff, just like accessories and stuff like that.
Yeah,
and I think it's just worth saying that there is such a thing as smoke damage.
Yes, right.
And so something that looks okay, it won't be. If it's got cardboard on it, if it's made of plastic, anything like that, it's red. Yeah. It's going to stink, and it'll stink your house out like an old Russian camera case. It just never goes away. So what the stuff that's there, the vast majority of what's in that place, it can be sold off, but it's going to go so cheaply because at the end of the day, you're not going to want to have it in your house. It's awful stuff.
Right. It's sort of like if you've ever gotten a used camera and it came from the house of someone who smoked, or maybe someone in Amsterdam who is really cool
that was going
that smokes a lot of really good hash. That camera is going to just stink of smoke. It's just, and that's just cigarette smoke, not a fire. So I want to say one thing really funny about this picture. So when people see this picture, right, immediately to the left of Don, who's standing in the middle of the shop, there's a set of shelves which are very obviously empty, right? Those are the shelves where all the 35 millimeter cameras were. And those shelves are, completely bare. So they were either two things. They were obviously either the cameras were just flat out stolen by the looters, or when they were pumping, jets of water into the shop to try to put the fire out for several hours, they probably got completely just blown off the shelf by the fire hoses. So they've been, either stolen, completely waterlogged, flown across the room by, powerful jets of water. None of that stuff is going to be salvageable. But here's the really great part. On the very top of that shelf is where we had the Exacta cameras and the old Soviet cameras. And it looks to me like there's still a couple up there because nobody wanted them. So there's probably at least one Exacta, and I'm guessing like a Zenit up there. So there you go. Central Camera can reopen based on an Exacta and maybe an old Zenit that smell like smoke that nobody wanted for years when they could have bought them off the shelf anyway. That's the funniest thing about this photo. I'm not even kidding you. The thing that really hurts me about this photo, though, is right about 2 paces in front of where Don is standing. There's all these little that look like bins, paper bins, which didn't burn because it looks like they were behind the glass there. I'm sure they got waterlogged, but it doesn't look like maybe those burned because the fire was deeper in the shop. But that stuff right there, a lot of that is Rolly and on the top shelf Leica accessories and like old Leica screw mount stuff, like filters and really, really kind of cool old rare stuff. And I don't know if any of that stuff is salvageable, but at least it looks like some of it's, intact on the shelves, because I doubt there were any hardcore vintage camera enthusiast people that were like, I'm going to get me some Rolly accessories. It's probably not who was looting. So that stuff looks like it's probably still there. I don't know whether any of it in it is going to be salvageable. But certainly some of that looks like it's at least still in the boxes. Well, probably waterlogged, but it's there. But it breaks my heart because that's like where I stood every day. And just in front of that are where all the medium format cameras were. There's a bunch of little blue colored things on the wall, which were bins where we had lens caps. That's like the lens cap wall. Hey, people didn't loot the lens caps either. How about that? But right next to that is where we had the really nice medium format stuff. And I'm just assuming that stuff's all, gone also. So anyway. That was my world. Yeah,
and well, there's not. I don't know what else we can say on that one. And
yeah, I would just say as a closing thought, if anybody has, theories, uncertainties, questions, whatever, and you really want to talk about it, I will do it with you and be nice and polite. So hit me up if you really think you have a lead. Like you want to do some Scully and Mulder shit here and investigate, and you got a theory about what happened. Hit me up and we can talk about that. But I will tell you that Don had a walkthrough with the FBI, I think on Tuesday. Like forensic fire people, basically, right? To try to figure out the source of what's going on. And I don't even think Don knew this, and I only know this having gone through 9/11 with somebody who was a family member of a victim that was being interviewed by the FBI and didn't realize they were being interviewed as a suspect and not a victim. And because that's the way they do it, folks, they make sure that no matter what the circumstances were, that you weren't the one who did it. So I'm certain Don had no idea he was also being interviewed by the FBI to make sure he didn't do it himself, but that's what they do. Anyway, the FBI literally is on that case, and they will be looking for, clues and evidence about how that fire started, and maybe we'll get some more information out of them, unless you subscribe to the theory that, Obama's FBI was probably working with the protesters and the people who set the fires to destroy America. And in that case, yeah, you're right. That's exactly what happened. So,
and I've got
I'm not bitter. Johnny's not bitter.
I was going to say, anybody that wonders whether Johnny can actually have a calm conversation with a contrary opinion on some of these things, I've seen evidence of him doing this. I've not been paying that much attention to what's been said in various Facebook groups, other than on the first day or so. But there were some comments and some questions raised from that position of selfishness that we were talking about earlier, and Johnny, you were the model of restraint, because I know what you were thinking when you were typing your responses, and you absolutely didn't go there, and so I'm going to say, well done you on that.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm capable of it, but not on the podcast because you know what? Honestly, that would also just be really boring if I got on here and I didn't rant about stuff because that's what a podcast is for, right?
Yeah.
So. But yeah, I can. I'm glad to answer people's questions if they want to know more about Central Camera. I'm glad to do that.
And Chicago as a whole as well, because
and Chicago as a whole. I'd be glad to talk to you about it.
Right. Well, we had other things that we had planned to talk about today, but I'm not entirely sure that's actually the right thing to do. This is going to be probably the shortest show we've done in a very, very long time. I think we're done. Before we start saying goodbye and things like that, I just want to thank those people that have donated to us since we last did a show. In particular, in chronological order, we've got Nigel Cliff again, and he says, forgot to contribute last week and would have given double this week, but I've spent the money on Tunnocks caramel wafers. And the good news is I've heard word on the street is that the Tunnocks factory in Scotland has actually started production again of Tunnocks. So
well done, Simon.
Yeah, well, exactly. So I mean, this year 2020 will be known as the year that Tunnocks shut their factory down, and other things happened too. The great Tunnocks shortage is pretty much over, and I've got to thank Fraser Yule for helping me get through this period without Tunnocks when he sent I think he sent around about 30 bars in the post. Something like that. Whoa. So thank you very much again for that, Fraser. A lot of those Tunnocks actually went out. I gave them as freebies of some wonderful customers have been buying lens caps. That's not everybody gets one. It's a case of some particular ones. If I know that you're a listener, or you just buy an absolute shed load of lens caps, then I've dropped one of those things in there. So, but thank you, Fraser, for that. And Christopher J. May says, cheers, gents. When are we going to do a crossover episode with Simon's two podcasts and get classic large format lenses podcast extravaganza? All the Dagors and Grandagons and G. Clarons are feeling a bit left out on the CLP. That's a good point. I'm not entirely sure how the two things meet because they're very different shows. It's an interesting one, that. Yeah,
it is.
Yeah, I sort of feel that talking about large format lenses probably belongs more on the large format show rather than on classic lenses, but I don't know. Who knows? But we'll think about that one. Then there's Robert Danny, and this is on the 1st of June. Cheers for continuously bringing the Happy Lens banter to us. So thank you, Danny. We enjoy doing it as well. Sorry, there's not been a huge amount of that today, but that's the way it is. And then the newly recovered from COVID-19, Lawrence Dunn, has also donated to us too. And I just want to say that any donations that happen to us in June are going to go to the Central Camera Fund to help rebuild Central Camera. But the best way to do that is to donate directly to the GoFundMe campaign that is on there, and also just remember what's been said as well. Yes, it's great to donate to Central Camera, but there are other causes out there, other people that are hurting out there at this moment, and it's well worth to be aware of that, and just have a read of what's been written on that campaign. It's well worth doing that. Okay, so thanks everybody for those, and we'll do shout outs and goodbyes, I think, now. So Perry, have you got any shout outs?
Two quick shout outs. One to Mike Epstein. He and I have been hanging out a little bit this week. We went shooting the other day on the one day that it hasn't been pouring with torrential rain in Hong Kong. Not only do we get some cool shots, but we also got to try out the new Voigtlander 35 1.2 at a shop, and he's just sent me a picture that he took of me in that shop, and that lens is sweet. It is so... I have serious gas for that lens right now.
The 35 1.2?
Version 3, it's just come out.
Okay. Yeah.
It's much smaller. It's 30% smaller than the previous Behemoth.
Oh, wow.
So it's like the same size as the 40 millimeter 1.2.
No kidding.
It's totally managed. Oh, it's gorgeous, man. It's
wow.
It's so nice.
Wow.
And that shot has 3D pop. I'll show you guys later.
Cool.
I see that in the horizon. So second shout out goes to my friends at Little Garden. Mike and I also went over there because he wanted to adapt one of his Rodenstock and larger lenses to his Fuji or Leica SL, so he can digitize his negatives with it. So they got him set up on that. They also got me set up on a lens that I've sort of hack and slash myself off the camera, but I'll talk about that next time. But the other thing that the lady who worked there showed me was really, really cool. She had this little woolen sack 35 millimeter f3.5. It was a demount lens. It was taken from an old aerial reconnaissance camera, so it was really tiny, like the size of the size of an external viewfinder.
I mean, aerial reconnaissance lenses are usually enormous.
Sorry, not aerial reconnaissance lens. It was a lens from an airplane, like an old military plane. But it was a tiny lens, so I think they used it for I don't know what they used it from, but it was from a plane. Yeah, it was found somewhere on the airplane. It's about the size of an external viewfinder. I was going
to say, did they screw it into the door where the toilet is to see if there's anybody outside? Is it that kind of lens? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know. I'll show you guys a picture of this after we're done recording. But so she's been dicking around with this lens, trying to get it onto her cameras, and she ended up housing it in this enormous helicoid, which basically turns it from a tiny, tiny lens into a huge lens. But this is the only demount lens I've ever seen in my life that covers full frame and hits infinity.
Wow,
yeah.
It does?
Oh yeah!
Holy crap!
I know.
That's crazy.
I know. So when she showed me, she was like, "Check this out." She had it on her Sony A7. I was like, "What the hell? This covers full frame?" But it does.
That's crazy.
Yeah, she's had that thing for months, and she's someone gave it to her, and she's just been trying to get it onto the Sony. And now that she has, it's just insane that it totally covers, and it's full frame. So, wow. Shout out to her for showing me that, because that blew my mind. That was super cool.
Wow.
Okay. Well then. So, Johnny, any shout outs before we go?
No, I just wanted to shout out to everyone who has expressed their concern, sadness, etc. for Central Camera. Special shout outs to everyone who has donated towards the rebuilding, and a extra special shout out to everyone who is risking their life right now for justice.
Yeah.
And I think that'll do for my shout out as well. So, Perry, how can people follow you outside of this show?
You can find me on Instagram or Flickr at Perry G.
Okay, and Johnny?
You're not gonna find me anywhere right now. I actually did go in to Instagram and approved 300 people who wanted to follow me. So,
oh wow,
you can go and look me up on Instagram and get in the queue for the next time I'm motivated to allow people to see if I.
Are you handing tickets out?
Yeah, maybe we need to do one of those things like when they drop a new pair of Adidas and you got to stand in line around the store to get in, and then you can have somebody hold your spot, and then they give numbers out, and then you still probably have to sleep overnight, and then hopefully you get in, and hopefully the shoe's not sold out. It's like that.
There are going to be people with T-shirts and with saying, part of the 2020 Johnny Season intake.
On the subject of T-shirts, I just want to say, if the rest of the team here agrees, we do have some Classic Lenses podcast T-shirts and other items that will be available for purchase very soon. I don't know that we've come to consensus on green lighting this yet, but that's out there, and it could be a thing really soon. So stay tuned for that.
Yes.
Yeah. we're almost brainstorming what these t-shirts are going to have on them. But I have a few ideas that I'm sure you guys do too.
Yeah.
So okay. And if you want to write into the show. And we have 2 emails. Actually, no, we have 1.5 emails really that we still need to do, and hopefully next time, or very very soon, we'll read that email. But if you do want to email into the show and have it read out, what's the best way to do that, Johnny?
ClassicLenses@gmail.com, and of course, and of course the each podcast is on our podcast website, which is ClassicLensesPodcast.com. So go there, and then you can get not only the podcast but all of the notes and everything too.
Yeah. And if people are on Instagram, what's the best place for Classic Lens type?
Check out Best Vintage Lens on Instagram. Those are our buds over on Instagram with Best Vintage Lens photos.
That's it. And if you wish to have a drink of a fine liqueur, what's the best thing to do?
You probably don't want to get some Malort. I mean, you can if you want to, but I mean, there are official, unofficial, in no way official sponsor, but that doesn't mean we want you to drink that shit.
No, and the competition, amazingly, is still open. So you can win a Raynox 135 f2.8 wet on wet bokeh lens if 2 people video themselves drinking an unopened bottle of you've got to open it to drink it, obviously, but drink some Malort, show us you doing that, and we will then pick a winner somehow out of those 2 losers. And that's it. So for me, I'm on Twitter as Simon4. I'm on Instagram as Simon Forster Photographic. I've got a website where you can buy lots and lots of lens adapters. Not lens. Yeah, actually, I've got a few lens adapters, but I'm going more and more into more of these wonderful lens caps I'm making, and body caps and things like that. I'm actually going to start making lens boards soon as well, with a bit of luck. And that's on simonforsterphotographic.co.uk. I also have an eBay shop as well with pretty much the same stuff on there. And our music is by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. It's called Octo Blues. And that's pretty much it. So I was going to say, have you enjoyed the show? Yeah, I guess there's enjoyable parts of today's show. So let's round it off by saying goodbye. And if you can, be like Carl.